Good evening, everyone. I'm your host, Jason Miles, on another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you like what we're doing, please hit like and subscribe. It is a passive gesture that goes a long way. If you are a returning listener, subscriber, or one of our very valued patrons, hell yeah! So glad to have you all back. We will be doing a movie night after the main show. That's right, after we wrap up here for all patrons and paid YouTube subscribers. You have a link to watch The Party. As The Party, we watch the 1983 classic film Scarface. I will be doing a show with Professor Catherine Liu this Thursday in person at UC Irvine, and it's going to revolve around gangster capitalism and the movie Scarface, both the 1983 and 1932 iterations. So, to prepare myself for the show, I have to watch both Scarfaces. I figured, hey, who better to watch Scarface with me than a whole bunch of people I don't really know that well? Most of you I've never seen in real life. That doesn't matter because we're going to have fun. If you want to join us for these fun watch parties or check out the replays, that's right. The watch party just doesn't disappear. The replay gets put back up where you get all the commentary, all the jokes, all the shenanigans. There's only one way to become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can join us for these movie night watch parties, join our champagne rooms, and more. Wherever you are watching or listening to this, there is a link in the description. Now, on to the show. AI and the military. I remember going to the movies to see the sequel to the 1984 horror thriller, The Terminator. Much like its predecessor, the film wasn't set in a distant dystopian future. It unfolded in present day. But the true terror wasn't the cyborg assassin. It was what it represented. A chilling glimpse into a world where machines make life and death decisions, and humans are merely data points in a war they can't stop. Fast forward to today, and the once fantastical idea doesn't seem so far-fetched. We live in a time where Skynet isn't a rogue defense program from science fiction. It's something we can almost see forming in real time. Call it ChatGPT, call it Palantir, call it Project Maven. There's a seductive appeal to artificial intelligence. Write my emails, draft my essays, generate my movie scripts, create a pop band, and release music. And now, fight my wars. How did we get here? Why have tech giants, the liberal hippie capitalists, many of whom once claimed moral objections to military collaboration, made such a drastic pivot towards weaponized AI development? Is it just about the billions in government contracts, or is it something more ideological at play? I come from an era where the greatest fear of war was that the wrong person might press the button, triggering a global nuclear annihilation and mutual destruction. Today, the button has become an algorithm, the hand behind it obscured by machine learning models, data centers, and defense budget. The fears are no longer just atomic, they're algorithmic. So what does this mean when the Pentagon invests billions into autonomous systems, biometric surveillance, and AI-powered decision-making? Are we truly moving closer to a future governed or destroyed by something that looks an awful lot like Skynet? Joining us to unpack this is journalist Peter Byrne, who has written extensively on this issue in his investigative series, Military AI Watch, for Project Censored. In this series, which we link in the description of this show, you'll see how Peter Byrne pulls back the curtain on the deep ties between Silicon Valley and the U.S. military, exposing the quiet militarization of artificial intelligence, the erosion of public oversight, and the moral vacuum at the heart of this high-tech arms race. Please give a big TIR welcome to Peter Byrne.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
How are you?
Wow, that was a great introduction. I really liked all the Lenins and Trotskys and Ho Chi Minhs, and you summed up my whole shtick. So I don't know how much more I have to add.
I didn't, because this was it 2 years you were doing this research for?
Oh, at least, yeah. As you can see here in my office, I'm a hoarder, and I hoard science papers and books on military AI and terrorism and counterterrorism and science. I do a lot of science writing. I've written books on quantum mechanics and stuff, but I'm also an investigative reporter, and so I like to follow the money,
Mm-hmm.
not just the science, and that's where military AI Watch came into being. I went to Project Censored because I've been working with Mickey and Andy Lee Roth, who's editing this series for 15 years. I've been on their shows a million times and respect their work a great deal. They're really good educational institution. Plus, I knew they wouldn't censored me, So, um, yeah, last Thursday, the fourth in the 10-part series, the fourth edition came out.
Mm-hmm.
The first one is called, and you can find it all at projectcensored.org
We
using your
linked it in the description.
favorite, yeah,
So
search.
before I even write anything about the show, the first line is, to find Peter's work. Here it is.
Well, the first one, which is, it's like 7,000 words, and they're
Yes.
available in PDF. You can download and print out, or audio, because I also actually taped me reading each
Mm-hmm.
one of these, because some of the concepts are interesting, and I like to get a little, dramatic. The first one is called One Ring to Rule Them All. Silicon
Mm-hmm.
Valley's plan to conquer the world with AI weapons. Can we do anything about it? And then the second one is called Stargate Fiasco. World War III will be fought inside data centers. The third one is AI Battle Space, weaponizing the 5G Internet of Things, such as your refrigerator. And the one that just came out is called The Problem with AI War Games. Is it the AIs or us? So, where would you like to start?
Well, I want to ask, what are the most concerning parallels between today's developments and dystopian visions and things that we get, like from the movie The Terminator? Maybe more so the sequel, because they kind of mention it in the first one. We see
Yeah.
he starts with the after effect, right? The robots stepping on the skulls and stuff. But most of those movies take place in the present day, but as someone posted a meme today, quite coincident or serendipitously, I saw it before our show. It was the most unrealistic thing. I think it was from David Sirota. The most unrealistic thing about Terminator 2 is that this AI, soon to be millionaire, that creates this technology, wants to actually stop it from happening and destroying the world. Um,
Yeah, it's the old Aladdin and the lamp kind of thing. You may not like what you wish for. I mean, it seems like right now, if we want to talk about modern day in terms of movies, that like a mixture of the Terminator, the Matrix, 1984, and Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times. With this ridiculous clown throwing the whole globe up and down on a daily basis and keeping everything in chaos. But with the Terminator, which I dearly love, um, it's the machines versus the humans. But I don't really see it that way. I think we've all, famously, we're kind of all cyborgs now.
mm,
I mean, we walk around with our little mechanical brains,
mhm.
and right now I'm interfacing with you, with this one of the screens that dominates my life, and all information is being filtered through these mechanisms that are actually not increasing our knowledge base but decreasing it, because it decides what we want to see. So I kind of think of the world now as, you know Silicon Valley imposters used to say, well, the singularity is going to come, and that's the moment when when machines will be smarter than humans, and They'll take over and will either be transhumans, or there just won't be, Homo sapiens the way we've always thought of it. Well, actually, and I'm not the first to notice that the singularity has already come. I mean, it came with the Industrial Revolution. We're increasingly bounded by the machine world in terms of what we do, and machines, have agency. And it's interesting. In indigenous philosophies, we think, all things are connected. The rocks, the trees, the deer, the wolverines, the birds, the eagles, the oceans, the sands, they're all our relatives, and I subscribe to that. I don't think that there's such a thing as an inanimate object. I mean, rocks have like this very active life on a different time scale than we have, and we need to respect that. So machines fit into that. I mean, I think they're our relatives too, but the question is, are we commending them, or are they increasingly commending us, or are we operating in this kind of quasi symbiotic manner in which we're serving each other's needs? Because the imperative of most forms, and I'm not going to say organic necessarily because they can be so-called inorganic, is reproduction of form. And machines reproduce themselves. Humans reproduce ourselves. We reproduce our societies, even when they're falling into tremendous decay, as it is here in the United States today. Possibly transformative decay, one can only hope. But to keep ourselves separate from machines, I think, is a categorical error. We need to recognize that we're part of this kind of this fractal, this organic, self-organizing, complex adaptive system, to refer to chaos theory in physics, and also biology, in which systems grow themselves. And so, it's kind of ludicrous to think that the humans are calling the shots here. It's already the combination of human machine that's calling the shots. And unfortunately, there's an element within the human dialectic that is, the wealthy element, the capitalist element, the ruling class, the bourgeoisie, the elite, whatever you want to call it, that is basically transmitting through the machinery what people should be thinking. And people are confused, and they're psychologically unprepared to examine the world without looking through the screen. The evolutionary psychologists famously said that we're Stone Age mentalities with 21st century weapons, and that's very true. We're still programmed for fight and flight and cortisol and all these hormonal and adrenal mechanisms that govern our way of thinking. There is no such thing as rationality. Rationality, is Robert Sapolsky, the famous neuroscientist at Stanford, had so succinctly put, is the excuse we make to explain what we already did. So, let's throw the Enlightenment out the window. It wasn't any good to begin with. And let's talk about what the connections are. And then how does that fit into the advent of AI? What is AI, and why is war driving it? So I will say that one of the reasons that we can talk about military AI is because the whole purpose, the whole corporate driven evolution of computation, of which AI is just an iteration, has always been driven by military necessity and by government funding, specifically the CIA through its In-Q-Tel Silicon Valley venture capitalist firm. For example, in around 2003, Silicon Valley went to the CIA for money to fund Palantir, which is in the news a lot. And Palantir is owned by one of the bros that came out of the PayPal mafia, which is Musk and Peter Thiel and a few others. And so Palantir formed as a private corporation. This is the subject of my first article, One Ring to Rule Them All, naming itself after, all these tropes in Lord of the Rings, which is interesting because they kind of turn things upside down. They with Palantir, for example, they use the uh, seeing stone that Tolkien talked about that was used by the Dark Lord Sauron to locate his enemies and then annihilate him. Of course, the enemies that Peter Thiel would want to locate and annihilate are not necessarily the ones that you or I would. In fact, we might want to locate him. But they have this cute little Lord of the Rings motif going on, and then they've got this myth that they all came out of Sausalito and The Well, which was the first online chat thing that I used to actually participate in back in the 90s. It was kind of fun. But the military and the CIA pretty much glommed onto that fairly quickly and started throwing money at him. So I think a lot of that's covered very well by Yasha Levine in his 2018 book, Surveillance Valley, which is about the militarization of Google, which is horrifying in its origins and continues to horrify as it grows. But Google was not funded to do no evil. It was funded to promote military and intelligence activities. So Thiel founded Palantir in 2003, and immediately they had a lot of contracts with the CIA and Homeland Security, which later became ICE, to surveil the border. And they have these programs, Foundry and Gotham are two of them, that sit on top of large databases. Like the National Security Agency vacuums up unfathomable amounts of data every single day from all over the world. No human being or even 1,000 human beings can sit and watch all this and pull out the meaningful activities. They have to have computer programs to do that. And the latest iteration is the Palantir programs that are pretty good at locating patterns inside these huge databases. And they can be instructed to look for, people with brown skin or people that are holding hands crossing the Texas border, trying to swim across a river, things like that. And then locate, all their relatives and find out where they're going to, and then arrest them and put them into privately run prisons and things like that. So Palantir is one of the nastiest groups that ever, came out of the American corporate empire. And it is increasingly powerful under the new regime, the Trump regime. It went public in 2020. So at that point, it had to start filing SEC reports, and we could learn something about its financial structures and what it was doing. Most of its contracts are with American and European and foreign militaries and intelligence agencies, and also some multinationals like Coca-Cola, which are kind of military in their own way, I suppose. And their modus of operation was to continually run at a loss, which is to spend more money on their operations than they were gaining in revenue, which makes sense in the financial world of Silicon Valley, because then if you run at a loss, you don't have to pay taxes. And people like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk and the rest of them, they hate more than anything paying taxes. I mean, they're sitting on top of hundreds of billions of dollars, and they don't want you to have any of it. They don't want you to have a library book or Medicare or Medicaid or anything like that. They just want you to buy their products. But they're not thinking it through, because you have to have a job to do that with, right? However, we won't go down that rabbit hole. Let's go back to Peter Thiel. And so when they went public, it suddenly became known that they weren't paying any taxes, but a huge amount of their money was coming from the United States military industrial ventures. And then Trump was elected, and their stock tripled. So Palantir suddenly was worth, with 3,000 employees, was worth 10 times, more than 10 times, the value of Lockheed Martin, which has 30,000 employees. I mean, Palantir is worth $200 billion, and Lockheed's worth $120 billion. So why is it worth all that when Lockheed obviously is making submarines and airplanes and hardware and has been around for a long time and gets more money than any other government contractor and pretty much can tell Congress what to do? They're being superseded in a way by these companies that produce software that don't, necessarily have to have huge shipyards and make missiles and things like that, although, they do that too. But it's all software based. And they are they're using their political and cultural powers to create uses for their products. Now, their products, which we'll get into the efficacy of in a moment, um, because a lot of their funding comes from the military, they make weapons, right? They're not being funded to make wheat that can grow with no water or other sorts of useful products. They're making necro products. They're making products that kill people because that's where the money is under late stage monopoly capitalism. So what they need if they make these products is, guess what? They need wars. They have to have wars, otherwise nobody's going to need their products. Currently, the big shibboleth that is being touted by Peter Thiel and people like Eric Schmidt, who we can get into, and Mark Andreessen and the rest of the Silicon Valley oligarchs, is China. They actually, and I read about this a lot in my stories, they actually want to go to war with China. They're preparing us to do that, and the armaments are now being deployed to do that, especially over the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think the Trump regime just issued an executive order a couple of days ago saying that we have to elevate China from what they had called our pacing competitor to our prime enemy. And when capitalism gets in trouble in trade wars and stuff like that, they usually go into hot wars to create a lot of destruction and rebuild again. And usually the entity with the most money and the most advanced weapons comes out on top, like the United States did after World War II. So the fourth article that I just did is about AI war games, because a lot of the war games that are being done these days with AI are on wars fought between China and the United States in the Taiwan Straits, United States with Japan as its ally. And when they use the AIs to do it, they get the same results that they were using when they had non-large language models doing this type of thing. It almost always results in nuclear war, because once these entities start fighting and one of them starts to lose and they have nuclear weapons, they resort to it. And the war games, and you can see it when you go and you read the story on the problem with AI war games, shows us that two kinds of truth. One, when you consider that the large language models, the so-called AIs, are trained on the internet and trained on only military doctrine and trained on our cultures, it's not surprising that they always go towards war. They don't go towards diplomacy. They don't go towards peace, because we have a very warlike culture, and their training materials are very warlike. So it's not surprising that they are not unconcerned with igniting global nuclear wars, because they're not thinking in the same way that we do of the horrors of experiencing, Hiroshima or Nagasaki. I mean, Americans have no trouble thinking about other people experiencing horrors like Gaza. People aren't exactly like stopping and every day and praying that the people of Gaza can survive. They're hardly thinking about it at all, because the news media is telling them to think about the latest crap that Trump is doing, or the latest meme. So the war games are, telling us something about ourselves, basically, when we play them. And the AI element of it, is so interesting, because I'm firmly convinced that there's going to be what is called another AI winter, and fairly soon. Now, the short story on that is that artificial intelligence, which is a great marketing term, there's a new book called AI Con by Emily Bender and a couple of other scientists that are really good critics of artificial intelligence, really grounded. Artificial intelligence is a ridiculous word. It was invented by a conference in the 1950s, when people were trying to develop computational devices that were based actually on the bomb sites that were used by B-17 bombers during the Norden bomb sites during World War II, which could locate enemy installations even through cloudy conditions and ensure that the bombs more or less hit their targets using early kinds of analog computers. So after that, there was a big move to, as digitization came along, to increasingly develop computational systems that could tell us what to do, not just tell us like where something is, which actually is their highest and best use is search mechanisms, and as far as I'm concerned, um, but that can think for us in a sense. And they've never worked. There's a lot of hype gets um, promoted by venture capitalists and by the ignorant media. It's happened like 5 times in the last 60 years. Well, this is now the new AI is going to work, right? And then the machines fail to produce as predicted, and the funding dries up, and they have what they call an AI winter. Well, in around 2022, with the advent of the large language models, this thing got put on steroids. Now, a lot of people don't know what large language models are. They're not your friend. They're not remotely human. They resemble nothing similar to a brain. They're neural nets, so called, or not like the neural nets in your head or those in a tadpole. Large language models are basically what they call perceptrons. They're uh, computational uh, uh, methodologies that vacuum up huge amounts of data from the internet, using from Reddit, from Common Crawl, from Wikipedia. Um, they vacuum up huge amounts of information that's in the digital world that they can get to with their bots. They can't get to a lot of stuff. They can't get into military computers for the most part, or a lot of science uh, databases and universities and corporations. They're locked out of those. So what they end up with is a lot of digital garbage. And what the short story on that is that people wonder why they hallucinate or confabulate. And the reason is because they're training data. And the method by which that training data is used and deployed is very different than what is called symbolic logic, which is the pre large language model type of artificial intelligence, which was more of like, if X, then Y. It was kind of thinking through things in a way that could record, and that you as the computer user could follow. You could print out a tape or get a record of what logical paths the machine had taken through a hierarchies of data to come out with answers to your queries and to perform various operations like mathematical operations. Large language models, machine learning doesn't work like that. They vacuum up this vast amounts of data, and which costs like millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in electricity to do, and in these advanced chips, these AI NVIDIA chips that you have to use, and in water, because they get really hot and you have to cool them. They're a pollution disaster. And then they store this data in fragments inside the chips. They're called tokens. So a token might be the syllables of a word. Take battle space. That could be 2 tokens, battle and space, or it could be more. It could be A and T L E and S P. It could be 4 tokens. With an image, it might take like the toenail of a cat, and then a cat's paw, and then a leg, and then a cat's face. And it stores them as these little tokens, these little fragments, in terms of a kind of proximity, a mathematical function in what's called a phase space, which we don't need to really get into, but it's a multi-dimensional space. It's not like just 4-dimensional, in which objects, in this case electronic bits, can be stored and labeled and have a certain proximity to each other in this space, which means that they're just closer, which means that the AI calculation can make predictions. It can say, well, this toenail is really close to this cat's toenail, which has been labeled a cat's toenail, by the way. And usually it's a human that had to do that. very underpaid, and usually in a third world country.
Mhm.
This cat's toenail is similar to this cat's foot, to the leg, to the face. So that's a whole cat. So we'll put that together, at light speed, and we'll have a cat. Or if uh, I give it a prompt, for example, how many journalism awards has Peter Byrne ever won?
Mhm.
It runs throughout its entire corpus of data, which is one of the reasons it costs so much, because it doesn't have any shortcuts. Basically, every time you ask one of these chats, even a stupid question like "What time is it?" it's probably got to spend enough data to fry your eggs in the morning, or keep your refrigerator going all.
Isn't that why they said stop telling AI thank you?
Yeah, that was Meta said, yeah, you're wasting our electricity. When you're being polite to your AI, it's costing us too much for it to compute the appropriate answer. And the way it computes that answer is it has to essentially review all of the data. And it's got trillions, literally trillions of these little tokens. It's got to go look at every one of them and see which ones are the closest to another, so it can come up with thank you, right?
Mhm.
Or it can come up with an essay for your American history class in 11th grade, or whatever. But it's going to inevitably 20% or more is going to be full of hallucinations, which means lies, which means confabulations. So I asked a chat GPT when it first came out, I said, how many journalism awards has Peter Byrne won? And it gave me the Pulitzer Prize and the Polk and a bunch of awards that I never got. And it didn't give me any of the awards that I did get, right? And it said it very authoritatively. So I almost believed that I had a Pulitzer Prize, but that's never going to happen. So how could that be? And the other day, Apple, and I talk about this in my latest article, came out with this just bombshell. The paper is the lab, one of the computer lab at Apple. Has some independence, I guess, from Tim Cook. Anyway, they published this paper, and they completely tore apart this new meme that OpenAI and Meta and the rest of them have put out. That you can follow the reasoning processes of the large language model. Now, the problem is and the reason that they came up with this notion, this so-called reasoning notion, is that they ran out of data. They used up the whole internet, right? And then they went, famously, and started literally tearing pages out of books and scanning them and then cannibalizing that data, millions of documents. But they ran out of anything that they didn't have to pay for. And it's not working out that well in the business realm. The businesses that have gone over to AI in their sales activities and in their scientific activities are increasingly being disappointed because the things aren't intelligent. They're predictive machines, and they depend on what data you give them. If you give them a narrow kind of data, like say you're an executive at Target Corporation and you want to know the ethnicity of people that tend to buy a certain kind of food in your store, you can get your cameras to watch over your customers for a few days or whatever, and then the AI can analyze it and go, oh yeah, Latin people like to eat cactus, right? And so you should put the cactus in the aisle nearest to the other things that they like, whatever that AI decides that is through its observation. Okay, well, it can do that. It's not very good at medical stuff. I mean, I'm looking at the Financial Times today. Microsoft AI unit unveils its first medical diagnosis tool, right? It's part of this reasoning thing, this chain of debate that it claims that you can backtrack the answer that a chat gives you and see how it arrived at it, but it's actually not true. They're lying. And you read this whole article about all Microsoft is built like this thing that's 4 times more successful than human doctors at diagnosing complex ailments. And then you get to the last paragraph, right? And it says, he emphasized, though, the technology was still in its early stages, had not been peer reviewed, and was not ready yet for clinical environment, right? So they're just selling crap. And then next to it is Google agrees to buy from planned fusion plant. It's this article about how Google is going to power its data centers, which just use ungodly amounts of electricity and spew out ungodly amounts of greenhouse gases. They've already agreed to buy a fusion power plant in 2030 from this corporation called Commonwealth Fusion Systems in Virginia, right? And it sounds really great, until you get to the end of the article. It says the promise of fusion is tantalizing, blah blah blah, because it emits no nuclear waste or carbon, and blah blah blah. Yet skeptics continue to argue that commercial fusion power remains decades away. Well, it does remain decades away. Nobody knows how to do fusion power. We know how to do fusion bombs, like we know how to do fission bombs. We can use fission for nuclear energy, but nobody has been able to yet to figure out how to do fusion for nuclear energy. And if they did, it would do all those things. So why Google is actually signing a contract to buy this plant, I don't think has anything to do with them thinking that they're actually going to have a fusion plant. I think it has everything to do with market manipulations right now, because so much money has been put into artificial intelligence. It's this huge Ponzi scheme. It's this huge like tulip mania boondoggle that's going on, and they're all scrambling around trying to figure out how to save their investments. I mean, Microsoft and OpenAI, which have been partners, are now at each other's throats, because going back to this paper by the Apple scientists, they basically gave the most advanced large language models some very simple puzzles, some mathematical type puzzles that you or I could solve, that a fourth grader could solve. And it could solve some of them, but the more complex the puzzles became, the fewer they could solve. And so they kept feeding it the puzzles. And the short story on that is, you can read the paper, it's really good, it's not hard to understand, is that they completely broke down. They kind of went insane after a few iterations and could no longer come up with the solutions. And increasingly we're seeing that in the chats. I mean, people are not buying them at a rate necessary to sustain OpenAI's costs, because they're not working that well. I mean, yeah, maybe they work for a few things. If you like to write your email to I have a friend who's a principal of the school, and she's now dictating or getting chat to dictate an email to all of the teachers, based on a few prompts that she's given it. And all I can say is, well, yeah, that was like you just, lit the school on fire and blew up a whole bunch of carbon into the atmosphere. But the worst thing is, like, why don't you want to have this engagement one-to-one, with your teachers? It's teaching us just to talk to chats, not to each other, So my hypothesis, which I think is becoming truer and truer every day, is that this is a big money boondoggle, that it's starting to blow up. When you had, and I wrote about this in a second article about databases, the day after he was elected, Trump held a press conference in the White House with Sam Altman from OpenAI and Larry Ellison from Oracle, and this guy, Mashubi Son from a really dubious investment bank based in Japan called SoftBank. And they were going to put $500 billion into building AI data centers in the United States. Now, the reason given by these oligarchs for doing that was, we're going to reindustrialize the United States. And literally, the Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, said, yes, millions and millions of Americans are going to be putting tiny little screws into iPhones. Literally said that, right? So the crappy working conditions that are now being done in Thailand will be re-exported or re-imported to the United States. So people that used to have really good $50 an hour jobs at a steel company can now screw little screws into iPhones, and that'll be called reindustrialization of the United States. There's no going back on that. But the problem is that, how do you pay for it? SoftBank, if you look into it, is kind of in my opinion, a fraudster. I mean, it is repeatedly getting into trouble for making promises to its investors that it can't keep, and it keeps going broke. But then people throw money at it. I'm not sure why, because 1 out of 10 things it does, it seems to make some money, but it's in a lot of trouble, and it can't come up with the first installment, the $40 or so billion it promised. This Stargate project that Trump and Altman and Ellison announced the day after Trump's inauguration, to build all these data centers, these AI data centers in the United States. So that thing hasn't happened and doesn't seem to be going anywhere. What they also did, aside from trying to get SoftBank to finance it, which is not happening apparently, is they went to the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, which have these sovereign wealth funds, and also connections to Eric Trump and to the Kushner brothers, the son-in-law of the president. And they've got all these multifarious deals with Trump Enterprises and crypto and hotels and stuff going on with these sovereign wealth funds. And they said the sovereign wealth funds are going to put up with the money. Now, the sovereign wealth funds, are interesting because they realize that oil has a limited usefulness in the world, because we're all crisping and we're not going to want oil after a while when we're up to our eyeballs in rising oceans and stuff like that. So they're actually trying to find new sources of income. And since they have so much cash, petrodollars as it were, they buy U.S. Treasury bonds, which means they have a lot of influence here, and they invest a lot in the United States. And their newest thing is to invest in AI. And the data centers that they want to build in their territories, because they realize that those data centers give them military advantages. Because it turns out that if you're in an AI run war, which is something that's on the planning books, it's not going to work the way they say it would. I get into that a lot in my stories. But if you're going to have an AI war, it's going to be fought in the data centers. All these sensors, whether they're in outer space, they're satellites, or they're drones, or autonomous tanks, or some kind of virtual reality goggles that some soldiers wearing in the field somewhere, they all have to be feeding their data into a central computing bank, which is in the data centers, right? So it turns out that the closer your data center is to the battle, the more advantage you have. It might just be nanoseconds, but that can be a lot when you've got an AI war going on. So on the one hand, Trump and the Stargate people are saying, yeah, we need to build all these data centers in Virginia and Texas and elsewhere in the United States so we can reindustrialize and get jobs. But the problem there is that the people that are going to give them the money really don't want them to build them there. They want them to have them in their own places because they want to be able to fight their own wars. There's also another problem with the electromagnetic spectrum and AI warfare that relates to data centers, which I talked about in the third piece about weaponizing the 5G Internet of Things, which is a whole another deal that I can get to if you're ever going to interrupt me and keep me from just flowing from one thing.
No, I apologize for my silence. YouTube has pulled the show. YouTube's AI decided to pull the show. I disputed the pull, which the only thing I could do to dispute it was click a button that said dispute. Usually you can write out an explanation of why. And they pulled the show, they say, because we violated community standards with the introduction that I've been running for the last about 4 to 5 years.
So are you still recording this so you can do something with it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Didn't lose a thing.
So they didn't like.
We're still live on Twitter, which has almost 200 viewers right now.
Oh, this is great. So we're being censored by the AI.
The AI has censored a show on AI.
Wow. This is too good. I can curse on this, right?
You can definitely curse on
Fuck you, AI. Come fucking get me. I'm right here, motherfucker.
I've had some shows be pulled for various reasons, generally language. I've never had one pulled for our introduction, which again, we've been playing on this channel for about 5 years, at least 4.
I mentioned the introduction when I started talking, right? And I said, I like to Trotsky and Lenin and Ho Chi Minh. Maybe they didn't like those words.
Maybe, but a show about AI getting pulled by AI is Orwellian.
Yeah, well, we're definitely going to write about it at Project Censored.
Please. This is and what's crazy is usually, and I won't take a lot of time with this because there are a billion questions I have for you. Usually, what happens is you can respond to their response, and part of the response is, do you want to edit out the footage that's not that we said is bad? I didn't get that option. They pulled I can't even see the video on my dashboard. For like, they erased it like it doesn't exist in YouTube.
But Twitter is recording it?
Yes. Twitter and Facebook is playing it right now.
Wow. I wonder why it didn't fall afoul of their algorithms yet.
I guess the all-powerful AI is YouTube's.
We should also make sure we record everything on our own devices. Actually, our own devices will turn against us too. What we need to do is just start remembering things, you know?
What a novel like phone numbers, like 20 years ago.
People apparently, can't even find their way home anymore because they're so used to the maps.
I have a friend that I definitely give this person a lot of guff to, for that reason, that you should just be able to find your way around, because maps take you in the directions they want you to go, not necessarily the correct way.
Right.
So yeah, like someone said, they pulled the whole show. They literally disappeared the show, Peter. So this is, and again, I've never had this happen where a show has disappeared.
Wow, it means we're doing something right.
That's what I think, but it also means that I'm not making any money.
Oh. Well, they know that, don't they?
Yeah. How do you hit a stupid leftist? Just turn off the internet.
I'll subscribe when we're done, but I don't know if I can subscribe to YouTube after that. But
this is insane. Yeah. Well, I did want to ask you this question, kind of going back to when you were talking about Silicon Valley, and I think this was something that really resonated in reading your, I think the first or second piece, maybe it was the first piece. Many Silicon Valley firms publicly distance themselves from military contracts. What changed, and is it simply about profit or something deeper? You write, Google employees once revolted against military contracts. Today, Google Cloud pitches AI tools to the Pentagon.
Yeah. Same with OpenAI. I mean, their whole thing was it's a nonprofit. They were there to do human good, and they would never work with the military forces. And then a few months ago, both them and Meta, otherwise known as Facebook, reversed that. Now they've got, I think that OpenAI just signed a couple days ago a $200 million contract with the Department of War, and Meta's got all sorts of stuff. And the reason I did it was because they need the cash.
Mm-hmm.
You've got this war between OpenAI and Meta right now, where there's a lot of media about how Zuckerberg is going around offering OpenAI software engineers $100 million signing bonuses, and apparently they're taking them, right? I mean, who wouldn't? I would. And they're poaching their OpenAI employees, and OpenAI today announced it was shutting down for a week, right? Because it needs to deal with this employee situation. So it's run out of money because it doesn't make any money, and people are not throwing money into it right now because there's too many uncertainties about whether it's going to be able to remain a nonprofit, whether it should remain a nonprofit, what happens to its contracts with its sugar daddy, which is Microsoft, because Microsoft has made it all possible for OpenAI to exist. It gave it all the hardware to run its data centers and its supercomputers, and in return, it was supposed to get a large amount of profits as OpenAI became popular, but that didn't happen. So now Microsoft wants to get out of that, and OpenAI wants to take away its own nonprofit status, which never should have been granted to in the beginning, right? But it did. There's a lot of phony nonprofits out there. That's one of them. Wants to take that away and become a for-profit so it can go straight into Wall Street and get more money. But if it does that, Microsoft's going to be pissed because they already put $15 billion into it, and they think they should own all of it. So I'll bet you, because Microsoft is one of the biggest monopolies ever, right? which I go into in the first story in particular. I bet you they eat OpenAI like just like a little minnow, man. I mean,
Is this part of big tech's plan to make more smart communities by infiltrating by way of the military industrial complex?
well, I'm not sure what you mean by smart communities. I think they're making our communities dumber.
Their word, not mine.
Well, yeah, here in the Bay
Smart cities,
Area,
I should say. Smart cities.
yeah, in the Bay Area, Michael Moritz of Sequoia Capital, who also owns the San Francisco Standard so-called online newspaper,
Hmm.
and a bunch of other oligarchs got together. They bought thousands of acres between um, here and Sacramento, out in Solano
I thought it
County.
was Fairfield. It was closer to you.
Yeah, closer to Fairfield,
Okay.
between Fairfield and Sacramento, and they want to turn it into a smart town, right?
Yeah.
Because they have this philosophy. They invented this philosophy along the way. You probably heard about Curtis Yarvin, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
we've done a few shows on
fucking
Yarvin
New
that
York.
didn't get pulled. Yeah.
The New Yorker like did this glowing profile of one of the most reactionary fascists that's ever walked the earth. You know, Curtis Yarvin a couple weeks ago. I mean, I would have died of embarrassment to have written that myself. It was a hagiography. But they have this thing, him and Thiel and the others, they have this thing called the network state, which is this utopia where only wealthy white people live, and they don't have to pay taxes. Like I said, they have this thing about taxes. They can't stand it. They think that everything that they make is because of their own genius, and that nobody else had anything to do with it, and nobody else deserves any of the benefits. They really, really think this, which is how most billionaires do think, right? Which is like you never find a nice billionaire, and I include Miss Lauren Powell Jobs in that too, because she's part of this whole military industrial thing going on, despite her little progressive woke attitudes about certain things. Yeah, so they want to make this smart community, right? But the people that live there in Solano County aren't really into it because they're mostly ranchers and they want to keep ranching, and they want to like bypass all local laws to do this. Will they be able to? I don't know. I mean, people like Gavin Newsome. Gavin Newsome is like incredibly wealthy. Like he's the pawn of Gordon Getty and that whole billionaire family. You know, they raised him basically to be president, and he rose from being supervisor to mayor to governor, lieutenant governor, then governor, and now people want him to be president.
Do you think this is kind of a side note? Do you think that's why Trump is waging his quote unquote war on California, because Gavin Newsom is the face of California? And if you live in California and you're even mildly progressive politics, you're going to have issues with Gavin Newsom.
Yeah. I mean,
that being said, he kind of is positioning himself as the true quote unquote resistance to Donald Trump.
You know, I was approached by somebody last year, this reactionary right-wing writer. I'm looking for the book over here. Who wanted to write a book about Gavin Newsom, right? And so I'm a so-called progressive, you know, whatever. I'm certainly not on the right, as it were. And so she wrote this book, right? Look at it. Nice picture. It looks like a vampire, doesn't it?
The progressive lust for
unbridled power. Newsom Unleashed, right?
Forward by Newt Gingrich.
Right?
Oh, God.
Yeah. So my reward for talking to her for a couple of hours was she gave me a free copy of the book, right?
Okay.
And and she kept quoting me throughout it, but mostly what I was saying was things like he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, and he's a phony liberal, and you know, all this kind of stuff, right? So they're using that against him. I'll never get a job with Gavin, but I don't want one. So yeah, I mean, that's part of why Trump is coming after California, but the other reason is because California is like the 8th largest economy in the world, you know, and if he can turn California into Trump land, then he's got an easier, you know, path towards establishing a dynasty, because Now Eric Trump is saying that he himself would make a good president, that he could do it. He was in the Financial Times saying that the other day.
I mean, is California and I don't want to stay on this too long. I do want to stay on topic. Is California and New York going to be these strongholds that actually do fight back vigorously? Because the two things is big policies. Pretty much everything he said he was going to do, he's done.
Yeah.
But the backlash, even from his own people, rounding up immigrants has not worked well for him, even with his own base. Tariffs that was a disaster for his own base. Bombing Iran is a disaster to his own base, as many of them are even isolationists within Congress. Is trying to fight these kind of almost kayfabe-like wars in California and New York with rounding up terrorizing immigrant populations in places that have massive immigrant populations. It seems like that's not a strategic, smart move.
No, this is just the Heritage Foundation's wet dream coming alive. It's what the Heritage Foundation's 2025 plan was a real thing, and it's largely being implemented. And the Heritage Foundation is just a bastion of outright, reactionary fascist, no matter whatever you want to call them. They're against life. They're necropolitics to the max. Now, speaking of movies, you see that movie Civil War that came out last year?
I did not see Civil War.
I was going to avoid it, but then I saw it, and it was great. California and Texas united and took on the East Coast. And there's this Trump president type, it looks just like him, acts just like him. And California has a huge weapons industry, right?
Yes.
Has
for some time.
Yeah. So we actually could arm ourselves here in a profoundly militaristic way. And I don't think New Jersey has that much in terms of armaments, right? So Washington, D.C., doesn't have much either. At any rate, California and Texas and the western states get together and they go to war with the East in the White House, and they win. And the last scene, they go into the White House and they just shoot the president dead. Right? It's very gratifying. And unfortunately, the acting is really good. The script's really good. I think it's a really good movie. You might want to watch that with your subscribers. Actually, it's really au courant, and a lot of the things that are done and said in it are really germane to what's going on right now. There's some really ugly stuff going on in the movie, but it reflects what's going on in life. You've got Democratic Party politicians being assassinated because they're Democrats, right? Mm-hmm. And the president is basically saying that was good. He doesn't go to the funeral. He doesn't say shit about it. Mm-hmm. It's that was good, Meanwhile, he's pardoned all these,
he pardoned all the January 6ers.
Terrorists, right?
Yeah, he pardoned all the January 6ers.
Yeah, they formed a fifth column to organize around, and he's prepared to wage civil war for sure. Because that's what's going on now. You've got these ICE thugs with, many of whom are not officials. They're vigilantes that have been hired. They're, what do you call them? Bounty hunters, going around with face masks and no IDs. If I saw some guy, three guys in hoodies and, ninja clothes trying to take my son away and I was armed, I would defend my son, right? I'm really surprised nobody's done that yet, because, you have to, according to the Republican ethos, you have to stand your ground now. You can legally stand your ground if you're armed, which most people can be, and you think you're being attacked, you have a right to shoot your attacker. So I'm really surprised somebody hasn't, done this with some of these unidentified so-called agents of the state. Just it goes on and on. Every day is a new thing, right? And that No Kings rally.
Yeah.
So interesting. I've been going to demonstrations my whole life. I'm 73 years old, and I've been going since I was Vietnam War days, right? Mm-hmm. And the demonstrations I go to are usually surrounded by police that are ready to go in and kick heads, and that do sometimes go in and kick heads. I didn't see a single cop at the No Kings ones that I went to in the Bay Area.
Why do you think that was? Was it an older demographic?
No, it was actually quite interesting. It was a huge mix of young, middle, and old. I mean,
Mhm.
there was a huge mix of political strands. I myself was carrying a free Palestine
Mhm.
sign,
Mhm.
which there weren't too many of those. There was a lot of American flags. You know, there wasn't anybody really talking about Iran, but people were pretty riled up about immigration because here in the Bay Area,
Mhm.
are not only our neighbors but our housekeepers and our gardeners and our handy people and our carpenters and plumbers often are undocumented, right? And we don't want to lose our cheap labor force, I guess, here. But I mean, that's being a little
I
cynical.
mean, that again, that's why I said this was going to have some horrible effects for his base because a lot of his base is petite bourgeois, and a lot of these business owners are losing, like you said, not just their redundant labor, but they're also losing a certain middle management force that keeps that redundant labor in line as well. As
Yeah,
this was just kind of a rogue operation, also seems like it's been run by AI. And I wanted to circle back to the smart or city, quote unquote, that that the big tech oligarchs are trying to create. Does it feel to you like this Randian ideology of like Atlas Shrugged
yeah.
is becoming policy? If they hate communism oh so much, um, their embrace of libertarian ideology is becoming more and more apparent.
Well, I think the Rand is on the left of what they're up to. I think the Turner
Oh no.
diaries are like more appropriate.
Oh shit. I mean, look, we'd be remiss if we said that there's no racists in this
Oh
current
yeah.
presidential cabinet on a level that we probably haven't seen. I can't even think.
Well,
Maybe
people are
since
like DEI
Hoover.
this and DEI that, and and my own friends say, yeah, well, at least you're getting rid of DEI, and I'm like, okay, yeah, there was a couple of like missteps with the DEI, and maybe a few people, unfortunately lost their careers, but DEI is fundamentally, and critical race theory is fundamentally about civil rights. It's about everything decent that we did from like the 1960s to the present to create a society which isn't solely run by rich white men, right? And
Mhm.
DEI has that, and affirmative action and everything else. For whatever little faults they've had, those are cosmetic, man. Fundamentally, it's been freaking great, for a lot of people. I mean, yeah, having a revolution would be better, right? Like your title of your show says.
Yeah.
But here we are at the moment of the decline of American empire, and the revolutionary situation may actually be developing here. But is it going to be a right wing fascist led counter revolution? Well, that's where it's shaping up to be right now because the opposition is not real strong. I mean, on the other hand, the workers in the Central Valley that are supposed to be bringing in the agriculture this summer and the grapes in the fall are being arrested and deported, and those agriculturalists are freaking out. Those large capitalist farming organizations are freaking out about it, and they did approach Trump, as you may remember, a couple of weeks ago, and he backed away for about a day until the actual racist fascist pig Miller, that's his right hand man, made him reverse, right? Because actually, if you look, I don't know if you see the blog and the show run by Jim Stewartson. It's pretty amusing. Mind War or something is called.
Mhm.
And he made the point today. He was quoting from Trump. Somebody asked Trump, some press person, uh, about why they were detaining people and in Florida, and he misinterpreted it and thought that they were saying, why did he choose to live in Florida himself, and went on and on and on about how great Florida was. So I mean, he makes Biden look like fricking Albert, Einstein every once in a while,
He's, there feels like there's a cognitive decline in him as well. That I don't know if it gets the same attention that Biden's decline got, and
Well, it's
but kind
always
of
been there. It's always been there in a way. I mean, the minute he walked down the towers,
oh,
the
2016.
stairs at Trump
Yeah,
Tower, and started saying racist things about Mexicans, right?
yeah. Not
You
sending
know,
their
it's
best.
hard to just deconstruct his, decline from his politics, because his politics are demented.
That being the case, what does that say? I mean, you're in the middle, you're 4 parts in of a 10-part series that is very, very thorough, as people can see from what you've said so far. You went about 45 minutes before you said anything to me. But seriously, one of the things you talk about, and it's very important, is AI powered weapons development is proceeding in the shadows with little or no public scrutiny. I feel like the public has a comfortable relationship with AI because it's a joke, right? It's, hey, did you see some guys trying to bang his phone because it talks back to him and says nice things? Or this AI music is so ridiculous, or this AI art is horrible. It's not that big of a deal. And what you're saying is it's a massively big deal. And are we being lulled to sleep by AI profile pictures and stories of grown men falling in love with inanimate objects?
Well, it's like this whole thing that's been going on with the large language models is that they're the road to super intelligence, right?
Mhm.
To advanced general AGI, advanced general intelligence. They're already almost smarter than us. I mean, Microsoft is saying now, as I just said, its medical diagnosis tool is medical super intelligence. That's just a bunch of crap. I mean, um, there's like, if you go to my articles, I have link after link to perfectly robust scientific studies debunking this crap about super intelligent. They're not intelligent. They're not super anything. They're glorified search engines, is what they are, and massive polluters that we wouldn't want to have anywhere near us. And they're socially a disaster for not just our children, but for the people that are having to label the tokens. I mean, because a lot like Facebook and Scale AI, they pay all these people in Biafra and places like that to review really disturbing material, including violence and sexual predation and stuff like that, to theoretically exclude it from this databases. And so it's very well documented that there's a lot of PTSD and a lot of psychotic breakdowns that have happened with their workforces because of what they're being forced to look at for pittances, right? So I frankly don't see any upside to AI, except possibly, as like I said in the very beginning, around Palantir. It's very useful if you have a huge database. It's very useful at organizing and sorting through it and searching for stuff and finding patterns. So it's not the AI that's at fault. It's us, because the patterns that it's looking for are in our behaviors. Our behaviors are encoded into the data that's forming these large language models.
Mhm.
And the money, because they're having so much trouble selling these fairly, novel but ineffectual machines that, are so anthropomorphic that people think that they actually are humans. It's almost like a rock was started talking to you one day, you know. Uh, that's not, it's working less and less. Their markets are not going well, even though they're still robust, but they're showing signs of failure. The only clear capital that they're able to count on right now is military contracting, which is why they're all going into that, which is why they all got rid of their little phony ethical statements. They would never do it. I mean, there was a reason that they did it, because that's where the cash is. Because we all know that Pentagon's just like one of the biggest, forces of organized criminal activity in the world. I mean, it can't even audit itself, and hasn't for decades.
Jesus, yeah.
You know,
We just lost a few trillion. It's here somewhere.
But the other thing, and I go into this a lot in all of the articles, is that their pipe dream, which is this so-called Joint All Awareness Domain Command and Control System, which is this AI-dominated uh, computational methodology that will take all the information streaming, all the electrons and protons streaming from satellite eyes and sensors everywhere, sail drones, tanks, soldiers with goggles, you name it. Thousands and thousands of sensing devices, and then send them into a database where they could be parsed by Palantir, and then your human commander can look at a screen like I'm looking at right now and go, oh yeah, well there's our enemy over there, and let's send this weapon over there to get him. Or they can just say, okay, chat, you just go get the enemies. You decide who the enemy is, and you take care of them, which they perfectly prepared to do in terms of doctrine. Well, the thing is, that's the wet dream, but they can't get there. And I show this really clearly using public documents in my reporting, is that this notion of what they call a JDAC, a Joint All Awareness Command and Control, even by the Congressional Auditor General Accounting Office, and even by RAND Corporation, which is this huge military think tank, doesn't work and can't work, and actually is destroying the ability of people, of military, of commanders to think through problems themselves, and so they can make decisions under uncertainty. Because the one thing that in particular that an AI cannot do is it can't deal with anything that's uncertain. It cannot deal with anything that stands outside of the data on which it was trained. It can't deal with novel situations. So why would you send it into war? Because war is nothing but surprises. The victor is because they were able to surprise the force that they defeated. So plenty of responsible, if you want to call it that, military analysts in the Pentagon and some of these think tanks are going, yeah, we need to stop putting so much effort into financing this JDAC, because it can't and will not work for all sorts of technical reasons, if nothing else. But the Trump regime is full of David Sacks and Elon Musks and all these Silicon Valley venture capitalist AI freaks that have turned the entire Defense Department into a platform for funding AI, because this guy Hexpex isn't going to say no. And as they take all this money away from human services and from doing whatever marginal good the United States does in the world, and turn it into AI uses, it's all focused on military stuff. They're not talking about using AI for education, which would be a bad idea anyway. You don't want that. They're talking about military, and increasingly so. But I think they're in for a big surprise, because one, the applications don't work as advertised, and two, I think there's going to be a huge financial collapse around it. I think a lot of OpenAI and a lot of these hundreds and hundreds of startups are going to find themselves bankrupt or gobbled up by Lockheed Martin and Grumman, and the five big primes that have been the face of the military industrial complex for a number of years here. We started out with like 55 weapons manufacturers after World War II, and now it's 5, right? Because they all ate each other up. Well, I think they're going to start eating up these little AI companies as well. And so what the question will remain is probably the most egregious use of it is what's going on right now with Palantir and those types of companies that are using AIs to search millions of hours of surveillance camera data that little towns all over the country are sending into these fusion bases. 404 Media has been doing a bunch of really good investigative stories on how local police departments are feeding money into ICE through their own local surveillance cameras. That is here, and the surveillance aspect of it is more and more resembling what's going on with the Uyghurs in China, in Jiangxing province, which for the last 15 years have been locked down by AI-type programs and devices provided by Microsoft and Oracle and Apple and Silicon Valley to the Chinese fascist-type government there, which basically, the Chinese being of the Han nationality, they consider Uyghurs, who are Muslims, to be, kind of subhuman. Same way the Jewish people do in Israel. And they're turning them into slaves, basically, and forced labor stuff. Some people will say, "Oh, that's just a CIA like meme that is being overemphasized." But I've actually looked into it and talked to people that have been there and read a lot about it and studied it, and it's happening, and it's been happening with the connivance of Silicon Valley for a number of years. It's a total surveillance society, and that's what Silicon Valley and the American ruling class wants here is a total surveillance society. And
What do you say though? What do you say though to Peter? And I'm sorry to cut you off, but I think
fine,
this is kind of an important question that I'm sure maybe you get, maybe you don't. I'm sure you've had conversations with people, maybe even debates with people on panels, where when you bring up the surveillance society, there's almost a glaze over. People don't care that. I have a friend. True story. I have a friend. I was having a similar conversation, and I had the same sort of emotion as you have right now when you mention surveillance. And they looked at me like, I just ignore the ads. And I said, well, think of it like this. You might ignore the ads, and you think surveillance is all about the simplistic exchange of commerce, right? I surveil you. I know what you like. I give it to you. What if the things you buy have less to do with you thinking you need them and something being implanted into you because I am surveilling you?
In other
And then the
words,
conversation shifted.
you may be ignoring the AIs or the ads, but the ads and the AIs are not ignoring you.
No, we know it knows your moods. It knows how you feel. I mean, there's a reason why the biggest place to listen to music right now is no longer radio stations in your car. It's no longer a record store. It's Spotify, and it's no longer giving you a loop of the music you want. It's giving you moods.
Yeah.
Music and moods. How do you
Yeah.
feel? And what I was trying to say was,
Yeah.
what happens when the data it's getting from you, because remember, even when you pass an ad over, it knows how you feel, how you're feeling. What if now your mood's being controlled by the devices that you're inputting your information into, and we stay in this kind of perpetual state of numbness? And it really shifted the kind of flippant response. And again, I don't know how often you have this conversation with people and they get a little flippant with, I just ignore the ads, because it's bigger than just ignoring the ads.
The conversations I have with people are more like, they say, well, it's invading my privacy rights. And so I say, having occasionally a troll-like tendencies, well, who cares about privacy? As far as I'm concerned, I'd be totally in favor of being like a hunter-gatherer society in which everybody knew what everybody else was doing, right? So that when you did something bad, they could deal with it. And in a hunter-gatherer society, like you find in the Southwest and all these like cool anthropological studies that we have access to, if somebody did a crime in some of these societies, which we call primitive, but I think we're more advanced than us in many ways. They didn't just punish the person. First, they sat down all together and tried to figure out where the group had gone wrong, right? Now, if a person went and was a recidivist, they would hit him over the head with a stone, and that's the end of that. But, I'm suggesting, okay, if the direction we're going into in our, machine humans cyborg evolution, which I think I don't buy into this transhuman thing so much as the cyborg thing. I think is here, where it's a kind of a unity between us and machines. It's not really in the favor of how we used to be or how we may want to be. If it's going in that direction, is that a bad thing? Well, maybe not. However, who really likes privacy? Corporations like privacy. Governments like privacy. I use the Freedom of Information Act a lot. Now you can't just put in a Freedom of Information Act or FOIA request and get the documents. You have to sue them. I just had a lawsuit. I've got a lawsuit right now against the National Security Agency. It's been going on for 5 years. And it's pretty interesting. I've written about it. But the deal is, if everybody knew what everybody else was doing, we might get along pretty well. Now, personally, I prefer not to have the camera in the bedroom or the bathroom. But in an advanced society, that probably wouldn't matter either, right? just biological functions. And, you know, how can you commit a crime if everybody's watching you? Well, you can't, you know. And then the group's got to, if something gets really deviant, you know, the group can sit down and figure out what's going on wrong here. Maybe, you know, they've got like, you know, some kind of infection, you know, or there's a genetic disorder of some sort. Well, we'll adopt ourselves to help this person, because we live in a carceral society. And, you know, the minute somebody is accused of being deviant from whatever perspective, but we basically, you know, lock them up, throw them into, you know, cells or cages, or drug them. You know, our society it is not focused on trying to heal. And in the part of the society that's supposed to be focused on healing is actually focusing on pharmaceutical profits. I mean, you know, we live in an age of barbarism, and America is the epicenter.
Well, you leave my dick pills alone. Okay, I'm not married and 47.
Well, yeah, I'm happily married, man. So you come over and watch me and my wife anytime, but but I'm not gonna do it with you.
You'll be like, I'm dick pill free.
I hope she doesn't watch this. You're not there, are you?
I told you were going to giggle a little.
Okay, well, we're not in the age of universal privacy yet, thank goodness. But I am going back to your thing about surveillance. You know, I can sympathize with people not being totally freaked by being surveilled, because they don't figure they're doing anything wrong that's going to get them in trouble. And they see a lot of benefit because they like it when their iPhone tells them they want to go buy this X product, right? They like it when Alexa turns on the fucking music that they want at the right time of day. But that's the path to perdition.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question in closing. And I want to thank you also, Peter, for taking the time to talk to me today. I really appreciate that. And thank you for the good people at Project Censored for continuing to send your writers this way. What forms of resistance exist either within the tech industry or from the public to this growing military AI complex? You write, a handful of whistleblowers and activists have tried to ring the alarm, but their voices are often drowned out by venture capital and national security rhetoric.
First, I think we need information, which is my job, is to provide information about, you know, what's going on, provably, you know, couched in, you know, some analysis. I think there's a range of things that people can do. You know, it's not trivial to suggest that we stop using Amazon. I still use Amazon, and I know all this, right? I still I don't use Facebook or Twitter or any social media, but I got off of it because I became addicted to it some years ago, and I realized it was a drug, and I'm not going to do that.
Yeah. And
I haven't suffered as a journalist from that at all. But I definitely, you know, these machines are like IV feeds of endorphins. We're addicted to the endorphins that we actually really get when we push a button and something happens that we find enjoyable, or that unleashes, you know, a certain hormonal response that is associated with, well, that is actually pleasure, not just associated with. So, yeah, a general strike against our devices would be good. I don't hold a whole lot of hope for the American public at this point to do anything, though, because if people can't take to the streets against a live stream genocide that's been going on for almost 2 years, what are they going to really take to the streets for? Now, we did see the No Kings, right? But they were all waving American flags, and they were upset about, you know, losing their house servants, basically, and whatever kind of Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, and things like that. But they weren't talking about the military bases that the United States has all over the world and what it's doing to the people that it is surveilling there, and with the, you know, sending in special forces to assassinate people, just like, you know, what Israel does. We do that too, stuff like that. So I don't currently have a whole lot of hope the American people are going to start rising up around that issue. But if things keep going the way they are going, things are going to get a lot worse than they are now. I'm not just talking about climate. I'm talking about, this is obviously the seeds of a Gestapo rising here. All these, analogies to the 1930s and in Nazi Germany. On the one hand, people say, "Oh, that's just like, that was then." Every time I hear Hitler, I want to like turn the page. Well, I'm sorry. This actually, history. What's what Bob Dylan says? It doesn't curse. I mean, it doesn't rhyme. It curses or something like that. It's like it's worth listening to because this is happening again here for many. For 150 years, America has been exporting fascism in other countries. Well, now it's come back. Now it's here. It's fed back. It's bounced back. It's here on our doorstep, and we don't have a clue what to do with it.
Well, you heard it from the man. I think I fired him up a little. Or maybe he was already like that.
Well, I do believe that people need information.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe in self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that people need to take to the streets in a really profound way.
Mm-hmm.
I have no problem with civil disobedience myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the Vietnam War. It ended because the Vietnamese people kicked the ass of the American military, but they did it with assistance from American youth. I remember the Black Panther Party. They brought on the wrath of the state because they had the allegiance of the population, because they were Maoists, whatever that meant at that time. They were revolutionaries. They were a new thing. And that's why they had to be crushed. But we have to be willing to be crushed sometimes, And I'm not recommending that people strap on like, belt bombs and walk into like the National Cathedral, like, some people might do in other countries and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And I'm not recommending that people do this like horrible shit, like assassinate people in their houses and things like that. What I am hopeful is that literally millions of people will take to the streets and make No Kings look like a picnic in the park, and inevitably some people are going to break windows and things like that. Big freaking deal. What's a little property damage? I mean, if enough people take to the streets and say, we're not going to take this anymore, then the ruling mechanisms will have to adjust, because clearly they have no intentions of allowing another election in the United States if they can get away with it. There may still be one.
I agree with you wholeheartedly on that. But there is something to be said of enjoying comfort and how it blinds us from all that goes on around us.
Well, and class self-interest,
Yeah.
I mean, we are really privileged here in this country. Not everybody is, but a lot of us are, and that's hard to give up.
Yes.
Because it's one thing, it's hard to see,
mm-hmm.
But you don't have to look that far in some ways because of the screens. Because the good thing about the screens is we can see what's going on in Gaza. We can see what's going on in Miramar or, South, Guatemala or, South Los Angeles or wherever, we can now see these things. I'm really glad that people are out there with their little cameras, like documenting things. I think that's made a difference, and I think but unfortunately, one of the reasons why the state has become so draconian, is because they can't stand it that their actions are being increasingly televised by these cell phones. And so that makes them more ferocious. But the only way to beat them back on that is to keep, documenting what they do. I mean, I believe in, nonviolent revolution in the sense, not that people shouldn't take on property and stuff like that. But in the history of revolutions, what we have found is that the ruling class comes back in the apparatus of the successful revolutionaries. I mean, like Mao was talking about with the Cultural Revolution. Mao said, "Come get us because we've turned into capitalist roaders." and that's what the Cultural Revolution was about. But it was crushed, right? And maybe it wasn't handled so well. But you saw the same thing happen in Russia and Albania, and it goes on and on and on. But this is, evolution in human history. We've been around for 2 million years. I mean, capitalism's only been around for like 500, right? The idea of socialism has only been around for a couple hundred. It's a lot of things keep going on in the world. It's not the end of history, and short of nuclear Armageddon, of course, it's not the end of history, and that's always a possibility. But people are really stupefied about the whole nuclear weapons thing. They don't understand what the consequences of nuclear war are, or the extreme possibilities of it, or how close we have been to. My son is 22 years old. He doesn't get it, right? But I grew up fearing that atom bombs are going to blow me up every single day of my childhood in the 1950s and 60s, right? So I have a different attitude towards it. People need to become more aware of what the dangers are of living in this world as it is. And, probably a lot of billions of people in the world do know, because they're living under the boot of Western imperialism, or Chinese imperialism or whatever, you know. But they're not the majority. The majority world is yet to come into power.
Well, Peter, thank you very much for taking the time to hang out with me. Wherever you guys are watching or listening to this later, there's a link in the description to Peter's. He's only up to part 4, but 10-part expose on Project Censored about the military and AI. Peter, can I have you back on the show at some point?
Anytime, man. It's been really fun. You just got me going here, and we can check out YouTube's algorithms once again.
Like I said, it's the first time. Well, thank you very much, Peter. You have a very good rest of your evening.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.
Thank you guys for those that found the show on Twitter. Welcome. So glad to have you here. For those of you that found the show on Facebook, welcome. So glad to have you here. We are wrapping up. We go to a place called the Champagne Room. We're still going there. They're not going to stop us from having our quote unquote fun. Like I said, Thursday, I'll be doing a show with Dr. Catherine Liu. I'll be doing it at UC Irvine, a face-to-face with Dr. Liu, where we're going to talk about gangster capitalism. And one of the things we're going to talk about is Scarface, the movie from 1983, and the original Scarface from 1932. Its story as a kind of minority up from poverty success story through nefarious means, and how all capitalism is gangster capitalism. Hard R. Hard R. But seriously, if you want to be part of that, there's 2 ways. So I feel weird saying this. There's 2 ways. One way is become a paid YouTube subscriber, even though YouTube said to me, "We're coming for you," and took the stream down. They did. In a way that I've never had before, where the just disappeared it while we were on air. I immediately realized what happened and tried to dispute it, and even my ability to dispute it was very different than the way it usually is. So a show about AI got taken down by AI. But we will be going to the Champagne Room. Become a patron for as little as $3 a month or $30 for the year. You can join us for these movie nights that we're having oh so many of. In July, it is Star Wars Appreciation Month. We're going to be watching way too many Star Wars movies. And there's a way you can actually just try it out. You can try it out for free. So for free, you can come watch the movie with us. It's Scarface. It's going to be a good time. Everybody loves Scarface. You can find out why the rappers love it so much. But on that note, I am, let's go with cartoons. A somber goodbye. Out.